Hey guys, welcome to Foundflix. On this Ending Explained, I'll be looking at the Blair Witch sequel that came out just last week. Since it's still in theaters, I don't have access to the whole movie, only a few clips, so bear with me while I try to explain this one. Alright, so the sequel is set about 15 years after the original Blair Witch Project movie that came out in 1999. For those not familiar with the Blair Witch Project, it followed the journey of Heather, Josh, and Mike, who set off into the Black Hills Forest in Maryland to uncover the truth about the local legend of the Blair Witch. They have a pretty tough few days, as it's clear something is in the woods terrorizing them. In the end, they stumble upon a cabin. Josh is missing at this point, presumed dead. Mike and Heather get separated, and as Heather makes her way to the cellar, finds Mike standing motionless in the corner. Something hits her to the ground off screen, and we see a final few moments from her camera as the movie ends. So nothing explicit or definitive is seen regarding their ultimate fates. We assume they're dead, but perhaps not. Regardless, nothing is seen to make us think otherwise. Fast forward to 2014, and Heather's younger brother James is still holding out hope that Heather is alive somehow in the forest. He becomes further convinced when he discovers footage on YouTube that was uploaded from the Black Hills Forest. In the footage, we see a POV shot running through the halls of what looks like the house from part 1. As they run past a mirror, for a moment you see a reflection of who is filming, and it appears to show a woman. A woman that potentially could be his long-lost sister. So he gathers his friends Lisa, our documentarian this time, as well as Peter and his girlfriend Ashley. Their first stop once they make it to Burkittsville is the home of Lane, the guy who uploaded the footage, and his girlfriend Talia. They are both local to the area and have their own opinions about the truth of the local legend. Clearly, they think the Blair Witch is real and they want to see it for themselves. They offer to take James and his pals to the woods to show them where they found the footage, and so the six head into the woods to hopefully find out definitively what happened to Heather. Of course, things won't be that easy. After they make it to the forest, Lane reveals they aren't quite as knowledgeable as they first led them to believe. They haven't even been very deep into the woods before, and essentially coerced James and company to come along so they had strength in numbers in searching the woods. Those bastards, that is so not cool. It's not long after this that things start to get bad for the group, and familiar evidence of the witch teasing them are left behind, like the iconic stick figures. But guess what? Lane faked those too in an attempt to convince them that there is a reason to keep searching the woods. God, this guy is the worst, and our main crew agree, forcing the two of them off into the woods on their own. While our main four deal with what must now be real encounters with the witch, like Peter getting crushed by a tree and dragged off in the night, where we do get a very brief glimpse of something else, a strange figure seen in the woods. But more on that later. It's when Lane and Talia reappear that things get really interesting. Lane is especially on edge and seems to not trust the main group. We find out that even though it's only been a day they've been separated from the main group, it's actually been 5 days for them. And Lane claims the sun hasn't come up the whole time. This concept is a very big addition to the Blair Witch mythology and adds a whole huge layer to the witch's abilities. Basically, the witch is able to manipulate the woods themselves. That's why our original trio and the next generation can't find their way out. The woods are physically being changed by the witch to ensure they can't escape. She also has control over time itself in the woods and is keeping the forest in a constant state of darkness to make things even more difficult for her victims. All of these concepts weren't in the original at all. In the original, things were never made clear in any one way or another as far as if there is a supernatural force at work, or perhaps even a person. But now, it is made clear that it is in fact a 200-year-old witch with magical powers controlling these woods. This concept is amped up further when our final survivors Lisa and James come to the house of Rustin Parr, and the last place his sister was seen alive. James hears a scream and enters despite Lisa's pleading, and as soon as he's inside we see this isn't an ordinary house, as he is facing doors all around him. As he goes further inside, there are seemingly never-ending stretching corridors and rooms as the witch is controlling the layout of the house, making it impossible once again to escape. We do see someone quickly in the hallways, but in one of the rooms there's a flash of a woman seen, and I believe this is supposed to be Ellie Kedwood herself, the woman who became the Blair Witch, as she is seen to be older in age and definitely not in modern clothes. Back outside, Lisa is still unwilling to go in, that is until she sees a creature poking out from a tree deeper in the woods. Again, we only get a brief glimpse of it, and I initially thought that they had finally revealed to us the Blair Witch in its physical form. It looks long and lanky with overstretched limbs and a pale color to it. That's why I started calling it Slender Witch, because that's basically what it looks like. Slender Man plus an old witch lady. Of course, this is not seen in any clips or the trailers, but I did find this drawing that gives a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. Seeing this is enough to send Lisa inside the house, where in the cellar she encounters a completely out of his mind Lane. We haven't seen him for a while and he appears more disheveled, and it's obvious that even more time has passed for him than the others. He grapples with Lisa, spouting about how you have to do what she tells you, and tosses her into catacombs beneath the house. So we know now that Lane is definitely under the witch's control and sort of under her spell to do what she tells him. After an intense travel through the tight underground tunnels, Lisa finds herself being pursued by the Slender Witch, ending up in yet another part of the house. And Lane's back one more time to get a knife in the neck from Lisa. As she's running through the halls, we see her pass a mirror, which turns out to be us seeing now the exact same footage seen by James on YouTube in the beginning of the film. So the footage found by Lane in the forest that sent our group out in the first place was actually from the future, and the reflection scene was actually Lisa's. Boy, this time-bending stuff is getting out of control. Here's what I think happened. Lane had already proven himself untrustworthy after lying about how far he had been into the woods and setting up the stick figures. So there must be more to his story about finding the footage in the first place. We know that Talia and Lane at least went to the forest initially to find the footage, but we don't know the details. I think that Lane has been under the witch's control since this first time in the woods. He's taking place as the new Rustin Parr, doing the witch's bidding. Rustin Parr was a man who lived in the woods in the 1940s and was being convinced by the witch to lure children in the woods, eventually resulting in the death of several local children. However, no one saw the witch he spoke of. After he completed the murders, he was told by her that he was done and was let back into town. This is interesting because we see once you do complete what the witch wants from you, you are then allowed to leave the forest. It seems like there's no escape, and the only way is if the witch lets you out. In the end, things didn't work out so well for Rustin regardless, as the town folks discovered all them kids he murdered. And this concept ties directly into Lane near the end, who says explicitly you have to do what she tells you before tossing Lisa down into the tunnels. And as we've seen, the witch has already been able to bend time. I think the whole forest itself is sort of independent of the present time and time itself. It is sort of disconnected or on its own independent time. And regardless, the witch can make it whatever time she wants. So to that end, everyone that she has lured into the woods is now also independent of time, trapped in this never-ending void. She was able to plant footage for Lane to find from the future by manipulating the forest time after the events of the movie took place to the time when Lane and Talia first show up and find the footage. Get all that? This kind of time loop concept was also seen in a much more subtle fashion in the first movie. The house at the end belongs to Rustin Parr, but his house was actually burned down decades earlier, but it was still standing back in '94 and obviously still there now. So this is just one of many elements that reinforce that time is certainly on its own terms in the Black Hills Forest. The new movie just developed that much more substantially. Anyway, back in the cabin, Slender Witch is right behind Lisa, and she goes into a room reuniting with James. "Where you been this whole time, bud? Just hanging out?" And at one point, a huge light suddenly appears, filling through the slats in the windows, and just as quickly, darkness consumes the light. Some speculated this means the witch is actually an alien, and this was light from a spaceship, but I kinda hope not. This to me felt like the sun was coming up, finally turning to daytime, but even that tiny bit of hope is quickly squashed as the witch turns the forest back to night. Basically, she's teasing them with a final show of her power. With the witch now right behind them, James instructs Lisa to stand in a corner, and if they don't look at her, they're safe. But James is drawn away by an unheard voice. He thinks he hears his sister, but Lisa doesn't, and neither do we. He turns around, and that's the end of him. Lisa slowly makes her way backwards through the house, careful to look behind her with her camera. Then she hears James's voice, and before thinking, turns around. And she too is taken out, her camera falling to the ground exactly as Heather's did in the original. The end. Once again, the witch uses otherworldly voices to trick her victims into turning around and getting them. But also, just like in the original, we don't see what caused our final survivors to get knocked down. It's not like that big Slender Witch bitch ripped them in half or anything. This was a conscious choice, I'm sure, because as it turns out, that big monster isn't actually the witch at all. What? I know! Well, what the hell is it then? This info comes from 3KB via Blots of Fun, who commented on my previous Blair Witch video. Screenwriter Simon Barrett was asked about his choice to show the witch in the film. His response? That they did not show the witch herself, but the Slender Witch monster is actually another victim that the Blair Witch has control over. So Barrett's comments add another twist to things. It leads me to believe the witch doesn't have a body at all, but is more like a force or spirit that has become one or forever intertwined with the woods themselves, where she was banished all those years ago. She is able to control the woods and additionally can sort of brainwash her victims through voices that only they can hear, forcing them to bend to her will. She needs others with physical bodies to help lure in new victims to her woods. Those like Rustin Parr, Lane, and even the Slender Witch. In the end, we don't see the witch take down the final survivors because she's not physically there, but they are certainly screwed, whether dead or perhaps now under her spell. And I'm sure this has happened to countless people we haven't seen, as there are way more than a few handprints seen in the house. It's at least 100 or something. These initially being the handprints of children who have been murdered. So it seems to imply that there's been a lot more bodies stacking up in this house since then. It's pretty messed up. So who knows how many poor suckers the witch has gotten to do her bidding over time. Oh yeah, and what about Heather, the person we wanted to find out about the whole goddamn movie? Well, I think that the Slender Witch monster, if it isn't the Blair Witch herself, could actually be Heather. We were given absolutely zero information about what happened to her, and if the monster is another victim of the witch, I think it's the most logical to assume that Heather became another of the witch's subordinates. And who knows what kind of weird shit the witch did to her to make her look like that. Her appearance ties into torture that happened to Ellie Kedward at the townspeople's hands. She was put in a rack that stretched her limbs just like the extended limbs of the monster. Again, there's no on-screen evidence to support any of this, but I think it is the most interesting or satisfying angle to those hoping we'd see something concrete about Heather. That's definitely a fate that I think is a lot more interesting and also kind of sadder than her just being, dead. Well, there you go, folks. I think that about wraps up my take on the new ideas introduced in Blair Witch and how that had major bearing on the ending. This movie opened up so many concepts to the mythology and seemed to purposefully not develop them, forcing the viewer to connect the random pieces. So hopefully this was helpful to you in figuring out what the heck exactly was going on. Alright guys, well that'll do it for this Ending Explained, but if you have any suggestions for future brain melter endings you want me to tackle, leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching Found Flicks, see you next time.
Oh my god. Oh, they're everywhere. What was that?